Okay, we are COMP1006, and that's Intro to Web Programming here at Georgian, and it's the winter 2017 semester. We are week one, part one of our broadcasts. Between myself and Rich and Jarrett, I think maybe a little bit of Scott. We're probably the only professors that do this. We're trying to kind of have all professors broadcast live and so on. And the reason why we're doing this is because it's a service to you. Like I said earlier, this does not replace being in class. And the reason for that is because, you know, even though I can use things like Slack, which I will be using, we'll be talking about using Slack throughout the semester, it does not replace me answering questions directly. All right, let's get into it. I want to share with you the syllabus for this semester. So it's going to look very similar to what other people see. So again, we're here from 3 to 7, it says. Actually, we're actually really here from, so 3 to 7 means 4, like that's like, is that right? That's really wrong. That's wrong. That's actually, it should say, it should say 3 to 5, right? And now that I've changed it, we'll say 1 hour, and we'll say online. All right. So we don't know what it's going to, we don't know what we're going to do with that. It's a floating hour we're going to use for other purposes, right? So from 3 to 5 every Wednesday. The good thing about Wednesdays, like I said, for other people that are in the class earlier, is we're not going to lose a day. We're not going to lose a day to Easter. We're not going to lose a day to Family Day. You're going to get 14 weeks. And we're going to do our exam in this room. We can only do it for an hour and a half, approximately. So it's got to be a kind of a short and sweet little exam, right? I can't make it run for 3 hours. It's impossible. Unless you want to run to B230 for the last hour. Doesn't make any sense. So we're learning PHP in this class. And we're going to be using this book. It's a little older. It's Murak's PHP and MySQL book. It's the same book that Rich is using in his courses, right? So we're kind of aligning our course materials, right? It's still pretty good. And I told you, if I could say, I'll record this now. I don't like PHP. I think PHP is old technology. It's for the most part unstructured, right? When most people code it, we're going to try and be as structured as possible, right? Where we're in this class together, right? And it's a little slow, you know, when it comes to the server, and insecure. The security problems throughout. If you don't set up, if the PHP server is not set up properly, it can be prey to a bunch of denial of service attacks and all kinds of other stuff, right? It happens all the time. And I'll tell you a story. This is a true story. I had a client of mine who was on a PHP server. He, for whatever reason, wanted his PHP server to be in his premises, on his premises, right? He wanted it. He didn't want it in the cloud somewhere. He was super worried about his data, right? So he had a dedicated IP on his site, right? More than one as a backup, and he had multiple PHP servers that were physically serving his stuff, okay? There was no fire or anything like that. That wasn't the issue. Don't think it's that. We got attacked by China. No joke, right? It brought down his servers, and they stole his domain name, right? No joke. I don't say he stole his domain name. His domain name was so close to the one they were using in China that most of the traffic routed there, right? It was off by one character. They added an extra L at the end of his name. I'm not going to tell you which site it was, but this is an actual true story, right? So they bought a domain name exactly like his with an extra L at the end, right? And that was enough to bring down his servers, and no one could access his stuff. And when they actually got to this stuff, to his site, it actually routed to China, and he was selling products, and now they were getting porn, right? Like, I'm not joking. This is how it was, right? So it was a really bad situation, right? And it was all with PHP. So now, what do you do in that scenario? One, it's not because we didn't do the security properly. It's because China was his competitor, right? He was selling products that the Chinese wanted to sell, and he was using a domain name, which I'm not going to name, that they wanted. They offered him money for it that he refused, right? So basically what they did was they did a denial of service attack to take him out of business, and then use his website and his close to his name to steal his business from him or bring him down. No joke, right? Anyways, it all got rectified, and the way we did it was we changed IP addresses, number one. That's how we did it. We completely tried to patch up all the holes. We went all over the place to look at all the security postings they had for his version of PHP. We got the latest version of PHP. And what we did was, once we moved them over, right? We still were attacked, but we were able to deny the attacks. And we had to get a physical firewall, an intrusion detection system as well, separate, that blocked anyone who was attacking us. Lots of money, right? And for somebody who is, their main business is not web development. It's something else. It's manufacturing. So cautionary tale, I would never in a million years set up a local server again, even if it was in a cold room with all the wires and everything else. If we set this room up properly, he spent thousands upon thousands of dollars building this thing because he was nervous about his data. Nowadays, you know what I would do? I would send him to Azure, Microsoft Azure. It's way more secure. If Microsoft can get attacked, you know what? Let them take my data, all right? Seriously, right? And the big guys are being attacked anyway. You see it happen all the time. Amazon gets attacked on a regular basis. Microsoft does get attacked. Intuit got attacked. LinkedIn got attacked. I mean, it's all over the news all the time, right? The biggest vulnerabilities, though, PHP. So this is a disadvantage to using PHP, right? But it's everywhere. It's everywhere. So why do we use PHP? We use PHP because it's lightweight. It's easy to set up, which I'm going to show you over the course of, our time together, right? So it's really, really stupidly easy to set up, and it can make us a lot of money, right? As developers, that's the answer, right? Because if I can set up things like WordPress. WordPress are a CMS, right? Content management system that's very popular, and I believe on the website there's a full WordPress course, if I'm not wrong, and at Georgia, just for WordPress, right? So, and the reason for that is because we make a lot of money with WordPress, and it's in demand, right? WordPress is an out-of-the-box, solution so that you can kind of scaffold out a website in a very short time. Okay, we're going to talk about WordPress in this course. I'm going to show you how to do it, but it's not going to be the focus of what we do here together. Okay. I want to talk about evaluations. We're going to evaluate you based on 4 different assignments. They're going to be small assignments. They're going to be individual assignments. I'm not going to make you build a massive assignment in this course. We get 2 hours together, and I had a feeling you were going to go with 2 hours instead of 3. Okay, I'm just putting it out there. So I'm going to make these smaller assignments to evaluate you. It's very similar to what I did with on the JavaScript side. Each assignment is going to be worth 15%, but the assignments are going to get more difficult. So even though the first assignment is going to be like super duper easy, it's still going to be worth 15% of your final grade, right? So that way, when we get to the difficult stuff, full CRUD with PHP as an example and authentication at the end, right? It's still going to be worth 15%. So whether you do bad or good on the assignments, it's okay. It's going to kind of even out at the end. We're going to have a midterm practical exam that's worth 20%. It's going to be an hour-and-a-half exam because we only have 2 hours, right? And a final exam for the same thing. Again, roughly around an hour-and-a-half. If you do assignment number 1 and number 2, you'll be fine for the exam, for the midterm. That's going to happen on the 7th week of class. We'll talk about which day that is. And the same thing with week 3 and week 4. If you do assignment 3 and assignment 4, then you'll have your final exam will be no problem, right? Again, each of these assignments are going to be giving you the tools you need to build what you're going to be putting together this semester. I'm not going to make you build a massive site. We're not going to do projects in this semester, right? Only because we just don't have the time, okay? Not because I don't want to. I would love to make an e-commerce website with you guys at the end. It's not doable with the time that we have. I'm telling you right now, not properly, with authentication and everything else, right? But we can do it with WordPress, and WordPress allows us to. That's why people use PHP. People use PHP because they can do WordPress very, very easily. All right, so let's take a look at our structure. Now, what semester are you guys right now? So that means last semester you would have had like intro to programming, like 101, fundamentals. Who did you have for your fundamental course? Fantastic. Can't get better than Jarrett for fundamentals. Truly, he's an awesome teacher. He goes at the right pace, I believe. I've sat in his courses. He kind of goes. He's very thorough with the way he does his feedback. Personally, very impressed with him, and I think it's a good start. Now, what else did you guys do? You guys did with Java, yeah, and NetBeans, if I'm not wrong. Java, NetBeans, and what? What was that?
IntelliJ and stuff.
IntelliJ. Oh, was IntelliJ? Well, that's even better, right? I actually like IntelliJ more, right? That's just me. Right? I'm saying everyone's different. Some people love NetBeans. I'm an IntelliJ person. Why? Because I know that Android Studio right? Google chose Android Studio instead of Eclipse as an example. They didn't choose NetBeans, right? So there's a reason for that. And because people at JetBrains really do their work well, right? And that's why. So that's why I like IntelliJ. When I do, any kind of Java. It's also got a great, we're talking about tools. We have to talk about tools a little bit for PHP. They also have PHP Storm, right? Which I highly recommend. If you're someone who wants to use PHP Storm, I'm not going to use PHP Storm. I'm going to use some free tools, right? Because I want to kind of get, some basics when we do stuff together. But for you guys, if you want to use PHP Storm, it's available for students for free for up to 365 days, right? So we'll talk about that in a bit. Anything else? Any other programming that you guys have done? Just fundamentals? I know you've done more, right? Has anyone else done any more programming? Like just, yes? What have you done?
I've coded for Minecraft before, other games like that.
Now you're impressing me, man. Now I'm jealous, buddy, right?
Yeah, I made stained glass.
Awesome. All right. Stained glass? Good. All right, so that's so Minecraft. So what language did you use to code for Minecraft? Is there a specific language? Huh? Java, right? Okay, so Java, so you know a little bit more about Java. Anyone else have any other coding experience, right?
C#, C++, and Java.
All right, so a little bit more coding experience. C++. C++ is probably in my opinion, the most unforgiving language you can program with, right?
Oh, yeah.
Right? C++ it's a mess, but at the same time, it's the one language we use for game programming, right? If I want to program a vertex shader, I'm going to use C++, right? I'm not going to use C# typically, right? But, however, if I'm using Unity to make a game, and Unity is a very popular game engine these days, it's cross-platform, I'm going to use C#, right? And it's okay. Unreal is another good one. And I think if I was going to compare the two engines, talking about C++ and C#, I think I like Unreal's lights a little nicer than Unity's. And Unity everything made with Unity looks like Unity. Anyways, we digress. But anyways, when we come down to brass tacks, not a lot of coding experience, right? How about object-oriented programming? Any of you have done any object-oriented programming? You might have, right? If you've done C#, yeah, you got a couple people. Object-oriented programming is something that we want to be able to hit, right? Not in this course, because this course is PHP. PHP is unorganized in general, right? We're going to try and organize it as much as possible, right? And I'm going to try for as much as possible to use the model view controller paradigm, right? As much as possible. Yes and no, kind of loosey-goosey, in a way. And the reason for that is because unless you use a framework for model view controller with PHP, and one of the popular frameworks that you can use for PHP to make it more structured is Laravel, right? Laravel is a great little framework for PHP, right? If you want to be organized, Laravel is, it's a good tool to use. It organizes things in an object-oriented fashion, and it's something that is worth learning if you're someone who loves PHP, right? So we're going to talk about it. I'm not sure that we're going to have time to spend on doing Laravel, right? If we can hit it at all, it'll be probably during weeks 13 and 14 of class, like the last, or 12 and 13 maybe of class, right? If we do Laravel. So PHP is a little bit unstructured when you first look at it from the beginning. A lot of our resources are going to be online. You can find a lot of PHP resources on W3 Schools, believe it or not, right? And it's not a bad little resource. W3 Schools, you're going to like, do I really have to use W3 Schools again? Yeah, it's kind of a good resource because it talks about how to learn PHP for the first time. This is bad. I hate this, right? To me, whenever I see inline code like this, right, doesn't matter whether it's JavaScript or PHP or whatever it is, it's just bad. We want to separate concerns. We want to have our PHP documents be separate, right, as much as possible. But with PHP, sometimes it's impossible, right? And we'll talk about why that is, right? It's the nature of PHP, it's how we do PHP that makes it a little bit more impossible, right? One thing you need to know with PHP, just like we did with JavaScript in the last course you just came into, right? Or kind of one course was leaving, you guys were coming in, is we want to talk about the 3 layers, right? When it comes to, again, going back to creating web applications. One, the structure layer. Content is king. And if you don't have a good HTML structure, who cares about PHP, right? That's bottom line, right? Second thing is CSS. Who's really good at CSS in this class? Anybody? Like a CSS guru? How come no one's putting up their hand? You're good?
I'm pretty good.
You're pretty good, right? How come no one puts up their hand with CSS, right? Because CSS is hard. CSS is one of the hardest things to learn to do properly, right? So what do people do? Bootstrap. And that's what we're going to do in our course, right? This is not a CSS course. We're going to use Bootstrap to help us to make ourselves look a little bit like superheroes, even though we're not, right? For the most part. Maybe you are, but no one else, right?
I don't think
You're not a superhero? Okay. So we're going to use Bootstrap for that. So we're going to talk about Bootstrap and how to layer Bootstrap. Even though we're doing PHP, we're going to set up a web application, which means I want you to use console tools, right? So we're going to do things. Some people have taken Node.js, right? No? Anyone taking Node.js? We're going to talk about Node.js, and we're also going to be talking about GitHub in this course. Anyone do GitHub? Oh, some people, you're complaining already.
No, my brother took this course too. And he could not figure out GitHub, so I'm like, you better tell me how to do GitHub well.
GitHub is not that difficult, and we're going to talk about that today. It's a required tool in this course because every time I ask you to submit something, I want a link to GitHub and your zip files on Blackboard. Those are the two things I need all the time. And the reason for that is one backs up the other, right? If I don't have a GitHub, I got your link to Blackboard or whatever it is, and I'm good to go. It's not that difficult to do when you learn it, right? GitHub. But it's a tool set that we need. And we're going to talk about tools. Today is configuration day. Today is let's download WAMP day, right? Now, I'm using a Mac, right? But it doesn't mean that I can't virtualize and show you what it looks like on the Windows side. So I'm going to do that today. It's going to take a little bit of setup. And if there are Mac people in the room, anybody? You don't have to use, yeah, good. There's some people that are normal. I mean, sorry, there's some people that are Mac people. I apologize. No, I'm joking. I love PCs like that. Like I said in the last class, I probably ran PCs, longer than most of you have been alive, right? So no, seriously. But the thing is, I use a Mac because it's stable, right? I don't have half as many updates as I do with Windows 10, as an example, right? And with Windows 8, and with Windows 7, and Windows everything, Windows X, call it whatever you want. They just keep updating that thing, and then they make breaking changes in it, and I can't afford it in my business. It's impossible. That's why I chose a Mac. Not because I want to spend $3,800 on a MacBook Pro, right? It's not for that. It's because I get good support from Apple, right? Better support than I get from Dell or from Asus or from anywhere else, right? And it's a pretty decent system. Am I going to play games on this system? Hell no, right? It's not going to happen. I'm going to probably use my Xbox or my PS4. And the reason for that, I'm a console person, not a PC gamer. I'm just telling you, right? Is because I need to build a big gaming rig. And you know what really peeves me is I got to spend thousands upon thousands of dollars keep my gaming rig up to date. I can't stand that, right? I'm too old for that stuff, man. I'm 47 years old, okay? I love playing games, but I cannot continue to keep on my stuff, right? Spend thousands of dollars on my gaming rig. It's insane, right? Besides, my kids want to play with me, and the Xbox is easy. Overwatch, it's a kid game, right? It's amazing. It's easy. Right. That's right. It's all good, right? So, yeah. Come on. Really? Okay, you got to look that up. Overwatch is the best. It's awesome, and you know what? And the reason why is because it's just there's no blood and gore. It's kind of a clean game. You go. It's a competitive game. You're in, you're out. You're done in a few minutes. You don't have to spend hours and hours playing your game. It's not like Dota, or League of Legends. It's too much, right? It's that becomes a real commitment. It's not a commitment, right? You go on. It's a very casual game. Anyways, we digress. We can talk about games all we want, but it's not going to solve anything. All right. PHP. So let's get back to this. Yeah, B230. That's right. So capturing data and variables, we're going to talk about next week. Today, it's all intro to web programming and setup, mostly setup, okay? Intro to web programming, most of you guys have done HTML5 and CSS. I'm not going to go over what a request response is. You guys should know what a request response is. I'm going to bring up a couple of PowerPoint slides, only a few, right? Just to talk about request response and the difference between a static page and a dynamic page. And by the way, I'm going to tell you again, you're going to hear me say this again, I hate the word dynamic. It's a piece of crap. It doesn't mean anything, right? People use it as a buzzword to kind of sell PHP and back-end technologies, and it's not true. It's not dynamic. It's just back-end technologies serving up the view, right? And so it's kind of an older term that we used to use. Oh yeah, I know dynamic HTML, right? I'm like, really cool, right? It's not cool, man. You're just using a server and you're serving me up pages, right? Look, back in my day when HTML first came out, right? Like way back, it was like, I want to learn HTML. That's like really cool. It's like today's VR or MR or AR, right? You know, we all want to get into the latest technologies. And, you know, in 20 years from now, shuffling a little bit, we're going to say, well, you know, everyone's got AR. Everyone's got a, you know, some kind of glasses or whatever, and we're going to move away from our handset and go to a headset. I really do believe something like that's going to happen over the next course of years, right? Again, we digress. You can see that I don't like PHP, that I want to talk about other things. All right. Selecting data, right? Selecting data, right, is something we're going to do. So we're going to talk about data. So these chapters are from the book, right? And we're going to hit select chapters. These are in line with Rich's plan, right? So I'm kind of trying to, you know, kind of be in line with what he's done. He's doing one course fully online, I believe, and there's one section that he's doing in class. That's what he's doing right now. And I'm doing I'm the hybrid guy. I kind of do a little bit of online. I don't know. We're only doing 2 hours. We're going to be talking about CRUD, right? Because we need to talk about how to read and write and delete, full delete. Everything's going to happen by week 6. So basically, you need to know how to interact with the server, save data using phpMyAdmin, right? That's the main tool we're going to use for creating MySQL databases. The other thing I'd like to try and do with you guys, and this is kind of outside of the course requirements, is I want to set up a live server with you guys up on Azure, right? Now, in order for you guys to do that, there's a couple things. You need to sign up for Azure. Do you guys have an Azure account? Yeah. Thank God, right? Because an Azure account is like literally impossible to get these days, right? It's like really hard. Seriously. Microsoft Imagine has made it super difficult for students to enroll in Azure for more than a year, right? And it didn't used to be like that. DreamSpark was actually, in my opinion, a better system. But that's good. So if you guys have Microsoft Imagine, Azure, right, that allows us to use a MySQL database, because everyone's allowed a MySQL database with Azure. By the way, people will get mad at me. When I say MySQL database, they're like, no. It's MySQL. Don't say MySQL, Tom, right? Because that's like a violation of some kind of treaty, right, to say MySQL, right? I'm going to say MySQL, okay? That's what I'm going to say. So if you don't like it, tough, right? Our midterm exam is February 22nd. Again, it'll be a practical exam only, no multiple choice, true, false. I don't do that, okay? We're going to be talking about code reuse and error handling in the second half. When I see code reuse, to me, that speaks to me of object orientation, okay? So that's what's going to happen in the second half. Authentication is an extension of CRUD, right? And we're going to be talking about sessions and cookies and all that kind of stuff to make authentication function properly, right? With the MySQL database on the back end, right? Now, these weeks here, week 10, week 11, week 12, this is where we have a little bit of leeway where we can include things like Laravel, like a truly object-oriented scaffold that we can kind of put together, right? Again, each of the assignments that we're going to be focusing on, if I talk about something, notice that there's assignment number 3. Assignment number 3 is probably going to cover code reuse and authentication, right? That's assignment 3. And assignment 4 is going to be covering all my special topics in here, right? That's why they're all equally weighted. Because as we get towards the end, the topics are going to get more complex and challenging. Okay. Any questions around the plan? By the way, this plan is identical to Rich's plan. And disclaimer, TM, I don't know what you want to call it, right? So, anybody? You guys all good? Golden, right? All right, so this is what we're doing, okay? Now, let's talk about tool sets. I like to use Visual Studio Code. I have to mention something, Visual Studio Code and PHP. It supports PHP, okay? It does support PHP, and it actually gives you a pretty good code set, right, for debugging and IntelliSense and everything else. However, I have to mention that Microsoft has never really been friendly with PHP ever. Their Visual Studio product line is not the greatest when it comes to PHP. The better tool for you guys to use, and I recommend highly, is PHP Storm, right? PHP Storm from JetBrains, if you're a student, you can sign up, right? You can sign up, and PHP Storm gives you, now it says 30-day trial, but if you tell them that you're a student, they will, and we'll talk about how to do that. They will support you for 365 days. Okay, so that's kind of a really good deal. It's a professional development environment for you. This is one option, right? And it supports everything from like all IntelliSense for MySQL statements, like SQL statements, all kinds of testing tools that are built in, and everything else. Okay, all the major frameworks. So whether it comes to Laravel or anything else, it supports all the major frameworks. This is really, really good. Okay, so, and really good refactoring, which is what I like a lot, right? So it helps you code. The other option is an online tool set that I recommend called Cloud9, right? So Cloud9 is actually, it's a very simple way of setting up. Now I've already set up a workspace. And what it really looks like, I'm just going to my incognito mode because it knows who I am. So if I go to c9.io in incognito mode, wait a minute. Incognito, c9.io, there we go. It looks like this. You sign up, it's free to sign up. If you have a GitHub account, you can use GitHub to sign up with, or Bitbucket, one of those two will work. And what it is an online environment that gives you a little bit of a Ubuntu server at the bottom, right? And it's all encompassing. That means there's nothing for you to physically install on your machine, right? And you can do a lot of the things that we can do with more, kind of like IDs that you install locally on your machine. You can do it right with Cloud9. A great option, especially if you don't want to do any installation whatsoever. It's ready to go, right? The only thing with Cloud9 is, in terms of testing, right? I can't test using WAMP. They have their own testing tools, right? So if you want to test with WAMP or whatever, like a local server, and that's why I'm asking you to download WAMP or MAMP if you're a Mac person, so we can test locally first. I want to be able to fool with things locally and show you how this works. So you don't have to go up to Azure immediately. Later on, we'll go to Azure, right? But locally, we need to test locally. So this is great later on. If you want to connect to Azure, Cloud9 is fantastic. Okay. So there's some tools options. You can also use, and I hate to say this, okay, not because I don't like PHP, but because, it's just another option. The other option is Eclipse. I go to eclipse.org, right? If you like Eclipse, Eclipse covers all kinds of other things. You can download Eclipse, and Eclipse has something called, there's a web studio, right, that it uses. Actually, it's called a Tana Studio. If I go to Tana Studio, it's a version of Eclipse, right? Let's go here. That covers pretty much all web technologies, JavaScript, PHP, Rails, the whole thing. It's not bad. Okay, I'll be honest with you. So Eclipse is another option. And if you're someone who likes Eclipse, who develops with Java with Eclipse, you'll be right at home with PHP. It's got really good support, good code hinting, and you can't go wrong. Okay. I'm not going to tell you which IDE or text editor to use, right? You need to choose something that you're comfortable with, right? I don't recommend Visual Studio. Visual Studio, 70 million lines of code, is a pig, right, when it comes to PHP, and doesn't do a great job, right? You're better off using PHP Storm or Eclipse or something else like that rather than Visual Studio. Okay, Dreamweaver is also another option, right? Although I'm not really a fan of Dreamweaver because it does a lot of stuff for you, it's got really good PHP support, right? And why? Because people who use Dreamweaver make WordPress sites, right? I'm just telling you, there's a relation, right, for this kind of product. Dreamweaver is also a paid-for site that you cannot get. I mean, students can get the whole Dreamweaver or Adobe suite for $19 a month. Unless you're a designer and you like Photoshop and all the other tools, Illustrator and so on, not sure that would be really, kind of the best bang for your buck, right, to me, right? So I'm just giving you options. Anyone else have any other tools that they'd like to use? I'm trying to give you the big ones, right? I'll be honest with you, for years and years I used Tana, and I moved away from it because Eclipse keeps crashing, right? Eclipse was one of the most stable open source development environments that existed at one point. And over the years, as it included things like Android and other things. I don't know what it is lately. It's not the same old Eclipse, right? So I don't use it anymore as much. I use tools like Visual Studio Code. Okay, so how do I use Visual Studio Code when it's not really meant for that? If I'm going to use Visual Studio Code, what do I do with that? So first of all, it's a download, but it's not enough just to download Visual Studio Code. You also need an extension. And the way to find extensions with Visual Studio Code is you kind of look for PHP, right? And you can see that there's a bunch of different extensions you can download and install for Visual Studio Code, right? Here are the ones that exist. You can also see the ones that I currently have installed, right? And one reason I like Visual Studio Code is that it's very flexible in terms of downloading and installing extensions, right? So you can see there's all kinds that I've downloaded. Now I want to download an extension for PHP, so I'm going to search for PHP, and you can see that PHP IntelliSense is one of the first one that comes up. Notice that how big it is, right, and what it's rated, right? Whenever you download an extension for Visual Studio Code or anything else like that, you want to make sure that there's a high rating and that the extension itself has some kind of update or use over the last little while, okay? Take a look at this, right? So that's, to me, how I want to work it out. It's as easy as clicking the install button. Once you click the install button, Visual Studio Code will download and install. Once you reload Visual Studio Code, you're good to go. And now you have support for PHP. How do you do it? Well, first of all, you need to open a folder. Visual Studio Code is a code editor. It's not an IDE, right? So if I go to, kind of create a new folder here. So if I go COMP1006, winter 2016, 17, I'll be okay. 18, lesson 1, right? And don't worry, guys, I'm a little delirious. I've been nonstop today. And if I just drag this in here, right, you can see that I've got a folder structure. Now, just like we did with other projects, if you've been with me with other projects before, there are 3 folders that I recommend we always install in every one of our web projects. The 3 folders are assets, content, and scripts. So please don't watch me. Choose an editor of your choice, and let's do this together. Okay, so bring up your editor, create let's create a little web app. Let's do today, right? I'm a do person with you. Don't watch me. Okay, that's not how we're going to learn. All right. All right. So the 3 folders are scripts. And it doesn't have to be in this order. Content and assets. By the way, you don't have to use Visual Studio Code. Use the IDE of your choice. If you want to use NetBeans, go ahead, right? If you're a NetBeans person, it'll support PHP too. Yeah.
I have Visual Studio.
It's okay. I don't think it's a great solution. If you want to use Visual Studio 2015, I don't mind how you serve it to me. I'll eat your code however you give it to me. I'll eat it. As long as it comes onto my plate, I'm good, right? Okay, you're good?
I'm just trying to get my PHP guys started.
It takes some time. All right, so you have to kind of send them some information sometimes, and it takes a little bit of time. So you may not be able to do it right today. Start with the 30-day trial, and then have to activate it later, right? Okay, so here's my assets, my contents, my scripts. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a new file. We're going to start off with my index.html. Index.html, where is that being handled? If I make a request to see my index.html file, where's that coming from? Like, how am I getting that file? It's the web server. In fact, normally what we'd have is the Apache server, because usually when we're doing PHP, we're using something called the AMP stack. Apache, MySQL, and PHP. AMP stack, right? Back in the day, if you knew the AMP stack very well, you were considered a full stack developer. Not so anymore. Now when we hear full stack developer, it means Node.js, right? It's the mean stack. Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. That's what we call full stack developers today, right? Back in the day, it was PHP though, the AMP stack, right? And if you're a Microsoft person, right, you'd use .NET, right? So .NET would be your application server. Azure would be your actual server now. And then you're going to use ASP.NET, right, to serve up your files, whether it's ASP.NET Web Forms or ASP.NET MVC, or now it's Core. Yay, thank you for that. Makes sense? So index.html then, because HTML is the ending for this file, it's actually being handled by the Apache server when we make it, right? If my ending was PHP, it'd be handled by the PHP server, right? Now, even though we have an AMP stack, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, you can have different servers for each of the functions. One can be your web server, one can serve up PHP, and another one can serve up your MySQL database, right? You don't have to have them all in one box, as an example. For us, it's okay. We're going to have one box, one WAMP server that's going to handle it all, okay? So when we have an HTML ending, it means that we're serving up standard HTML. Okay, review of HTML, and you did it already, right? So tell me, this is a great opportunity for testing. What's the first line of our HTML code that we're going to put in, right? Doc type, right? And it's HTML. That's the first doc type. What else? We're going to also, great thing about Visual Studio Code is it allows you to use something to make HTML called Emmet. So that's a kind of a tool we're going to be using, a tool set. And if I look up Emmet, Emmet is a shortcut system for kind of creating HTML content, right? So if I look at documentation, there's some really cool syntax that we can use with Emmet. So you can do like one line of code, and it produces this. So let me show you how that works. With Visual Studio Code, this is why I like Visual Studio Code above the other ones, right, is Emmet's built in. You can also download Emmet for Eclipse, PHP Storm, WebStorm, all kinds of other IDEs. Visual Studio has Zen coding. It's very similar, but it looks like this. And I'm going to kind of give it to you a little bit straighter than we did with the web folks, right? I know that I need to wrap everything in an HTML tag because HTML is my outside container for my files, right? Well, inside my HTML files, I know I need a head, and I know I need a body, right? Notice that the greater than sign says head and body are inside of my HTML container, okay? Well, if that's the case, I can use order of operations with brackets to kind of indicate that my head, right, head tag also has a title tag inside there, right? And maybe even some meta tags. So I want a meta tag, maybe a couple meta tags, and I have a title tag, and maybe I want to wrap all those inside brackets as well. Hear me out here when I kind of put together this string. My body tag also has, let's say, a div tag. Inside my div tag, I have an h1 tag, and then next to that, there's a paragraph tag. And inside my paragraph tag, there's lorem text of about 100 characters. One line of code, right? And you're like, holy crap, what is he doing? Well, if I press tab, I get this, right? So Emmet is something that I'm going to be using over and over again throughout the course, only because I can scaffold out HTML content quickly. It's not because I'm trying to, to impress you. You can look like a superhero. Like it's almost like I'm like the Flash, when I'm using this. And I kind of said that earlier today, because you can kind of put things together very, very quickly. But it's a great way of scaffolding out code, almost without having any kind of template whatsoever. All right. So remember, the greater than sign stands for contains. Right, that's what I want you to think about it. And the plus sign stands for is next to, right? Or so basically, I'm creating siblings. And if you look at this code that I've written, it's very similar to a very complex CSS selector statement, right? Which is where Emmet comes from. So inside HTML, I have a head tag. Inside the head tag, I have, a title tag, or this is my title tag with a couple of meta tags, a body tag is next to it, with a div tag. Inside the div tag, I've got an H1 with a paragraph tag, and inside the paragraph tag, I've got some stand-in text of about 100 words. Let's make it 10 words. If I want to add in specific things in the title, like for example, hello world, I can use curly braces, right? And when I do that, if I press tab at the end, I get all this. What was that?
That's sick. You gotta write that out.
Yeah, it's really neat, right? So Emmet is a tool we're going to be using throughout this course. Again, it'll make you look like a superhero, but really what it is it's just built into Visual Studio Code.
How do you go back to just the one line after you tab it?
Undo. And actually, I do that a lot. What I do is if I made a mistake, or if I want to add something else, I create my one line, I expand it with the tab, and then I go back. And if I miss something, I go back again. And I miss something, I keep going back and forth until I've got one big line of code that does everything I want. Single line of code. Okay, so we've got our little, kind of our setup here. But we want to add some stuff to it. HTML should definitely have a language attribute that makes it English, because it's for localizing right now. Our meta tag, one of the first meta tags is our character set meta tag, which is UTF-8, right? And we also want to have a viewport meta tag these days, whenever we do stuff, right? Where name is equal to viewport. We're going to talk about this, what this is. Content is equal to width is equal to device dash width, if I can spell. Initial dash scale is equal to 1. So why these meta tags? Meta tags make it so that we have more compatibility with browsers, the UTF-8 meta tag, right? And the other one, the viewport meta tag, says this: hey, take a look at my viewport, and whatever my viewport is, stretch my screen. Make sure my width attribute for my viewport matches the size of my screen, right? So that way I know what my width is, the width of my window. Okay. Then I'm going to do a hello world in my title. And in here, I'm going to put in some, this is my CSS section. Okay. And most likely, if I do any kind of JavaScript alongside with my PHP, because sometimes I need to do that, although we don't like to mix JavaScript and PHP, because we can do a lot of the stuff that JavaScript does just with PHP, right? But if I'm going to do it, it's going to happen somewhere down here. This is where my JavaScript section is. When we use PHP, it's a different scenario, a different use scenario, right? JavaScript, I use JavaScript for special effects, all right? I use JavaScript for Bootstrap, okay? That's what I use it for when I'm doing PHP, right? I don't use JavaScript for validation. I want to validate with PHP, and we're going to talk about that. Think about it this way. Do you think it's enough for me to validate with just JavaScript, right? If I was going to do user input validation with JavaScript, so I'm using code on the client side to validate someone's input, is that enough from a security standpoint? Would you say yes? No? No. It's no, because I can turn JavaScript off, right? If I turn JavaScript off, I've turned off the security, pretty much, right? I can't do that on the server side. I can't turn PHP off. If someone's using a PHP site and I do server-side validation, that's going to happen regardless if JavaScript is on or not. So that's where, server-side technologies are really powerful. It doesn't matter whether it's PHP or even JavaScript on the back end. So this is where my JavaScript section is going to be, down in here. Okay. All right, we don't have any CSS, but if I was going to add it in, right, it would be inside my content area. Right, so I'm going to kind of add a new file in there, and we're just going to call this app.css, right? And this is where my custom CSS would go. We're setting up a template, okay? And inside my scripts folder, if I have some custom JavaScript, if I wanted to make some custom special effects, right, then my scripts folder would contain all my JavaScript and my PHP, okay? Now, because I'm using PHP, and because I'm using JavaScript in tandem with PHP, right, I may want to make additional folders, right, where I have JS. And underneath this, under my scripts, I may even have a PHP section or an app section. For now, instead of doing this, please don't do this. It's perfectly acceptable for me to just have a scripts folder and everything is in there for now. So we're going to make a new file called app.js and put it in. And this is where a custom JavaScript will go there. So again, for the most part, we won't need it, right? Because we're going to use PHP for most of the stuff, right? And we don't want to mix. You can't pass data as easily from JavaScript to PHP and back. It becomes pretty ugly when you try and do that, okay? Okay, number 1. 2. So here's our HTML. How do I link? Does anyone remember? Just again, this is a review. How do I link my CSS and my JavaScript? How do I link that into my document? And by the way, is it good practice to have my JavaScript inline inside here, inside my document somewhere? Or should I put it in its own file? What do you recommend? How about the guys in the corner who are normally really, really loud, right? Anybody? What do you recommend? Do you recommend that I should use JavaScript inline in my file or in a separate file? What do you recommend? Separate file is the right answer. Give the man a prize, right? And it's the same thing with PHP. I know PHP should be in a separate file too. You can do that with PHP. But remember that there's some instances that I'm going to show you that there's no choice. You have no choice but to put it in the same file. Okay, so that means if I'm going to link to it, and just to, as again, this is just a reminder, I'm going to use the link for kind of link tag, and I'm going to link to content app CSS, right? So again, I'm going to use my / content and then app.css to link to it. And inside my JavaScript section, I'm going to do the same thing with my JavaScript. So I'm going to say script where my source is equal to scripts and then app.js. So now I've linked my two things together. I've linked my empty CSS file and my empty JavaScript file, but they're all linked to this one HTML document. We're talking about PHP, right? So how do I make this, into PHP? I want to use PHP, right? Well, guess what? It's as easy as changing the ending, right? If I rename this thing, and instead of index.html, I change this into index.php, well, now it says, hold on, the language server needs at least PHP 7 installed, but it found something else. This is me. It's not you, right? But that's what it needs. It needs PHP. And if you notice now, it's picking up PHP on the back end. All you have to do is change to PHP. Don't worry about the language server for me. That's just IntelliSense, right? And I'll fix that later on. So PHP, once I change to PHP, now it's being handled by the PHP server. It's not on the Apache side at all, right? And once the PHP server is handling it, that means it's being processed by the PHP server, right? It's making a round trip. It's going to the PHP server, it's being processed, and then it's coming back, okay? And this is where we get really funky. We get really funky because whenever we process things on the PHP server, it's making that round trip. I'm going out, getting the PHP file, and it's coming back. Okay? It's more secure that way, you think, but it's also much slower. Okay? Let's change this back to HTML for now. Okay. We've talked about some simple technologies. It looks pretty ugly, and I want to make this look nice. So one of the things that I'd like to do is I want to put together some Bootstrap, right? Now, we talked about ancillary technologies before, right? One of the things you do when you install Visual Studio Code is I need a couple more things from you. I need you to install Git or GitHub. And if you don't have GitHub installed or Git installed locally, does everyone have Git installed locally on their command line? Or do you have the desktop tool? Which one do you have? Do you have any of it? Nothing. All right, I love it. If you don't have anything, this is what you need to do. You're going to go to, if you want to install it locally in your command line, you're going to go to Git, right? If you search for Git, git-scm.com, you can download and install Git for Mac and Windows if you really want to. And what it's going to do is it's going to install Git for your command line. I recommend that you use PowerShell instead of your regular command prompt if you're a Windows user. Okay? It's much more powerful than regular command prompt, and it gives you more feedback.
Sure, what's that called?
PowerShell.
PowerShell?
Yeah, Windows PowerShell. And it should be installed with Windows 10 anyway.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, PowerShell's replacing command line, removing command line and then build.
So they say.
Don't add it back and put them on that.
I know.
Yeah,
So-
I got this now.
So PowerShell is the way to go. So if you get Git and if you install it, it should be able to run something like this. You should be able to do on the command line something like git -v, and it should come up with something. Sorry, git --version. Sorry, and it should come up with some kind of version. Mine's a little bit behind the latest version, but it's okay. If you can't do git --version, and you're going to get something like unrecognized command, if you get that, it's because your environment variables are messed up. So I want to talk about how to fix that in Windows, right? Because I'm using a Mac right now. I'm going to switch to Windows in a bit. So you need to be able to install Git. The other thing I need you to do is, if you don't want to use command line, some people are I don't know, they don't like command line, they hate command line, they want to do things with the UI because you're addicted to UI. You can use a UI. You can go to desktop.github.com. And you can download a user interface for GitHub as well. Okay? It's a very popular solution. You can do almost everything that you need to do with this desktop tool. Now, the great thing about Visual Studio is if you install GitHub locally and on the console, it's built in. Visual Studio Code. We're going to be using version control anyway, right? If you have Git installed in your system, PHP Storm, Eclipse, and even Visual Studio Code will all link to Git, okay? So here's Git. Notice it asked me to initialize a repository. Okay. So I want to initialize this thing, but what I want to do in Visual Studio Code, and if you're following me with Visual Studio Code, is the following. I right-click anywhere down here, and if I open in terminal, in your case, open in command prompt, it's going to direct my command prompt or terminal right into the folder where my files are. That's direct. And that's why I like Visual Studio Code. There's a lot of little functionality like that that kind of makes it desirable. So what I want to do is I want to create a Git repository. Does everyone know what a Git repository is? For people who don't know,
I don't know.
a Git repository is a place where, again, let me go back. What are the 3 reasons? I'm going to go back to the 3s again. What are the 3 reasons we use Git in GitHub? Anybody have an idea? You're beautiful, man. You're impressive. Well, you're almost, I would say differently, but you're good, right? I would say it's a backup, a great place to back up your code, right? Backup is probably one of the main reasons why we use GitHub. Second reason is collaboration. We can share our code with all kinds of people. And to get jobs nowadays, they look at your GitHub repos to see if you've done any work there, like real code, all right? So it's really important to get GitHub and use GitHub all the time, right? And the third reason is revision control. So like I was telling people earlier in other classes today, I can't remember a time where I haven't said something like, it just worked. I don't understand. It doesn't work anymore. What do I do, right? GitHub says, no. You can step back. You can compare what you did from your last commit to this commit. Each commit, that's what the language of GitHub calls a snapshot. It's a snapshot of your code, right? At the current state that you kind of created that snapshot, almost like a picture of your code at that particular time, right? That's what I want you to think about it. So Git, there's 2 parts. Git is local to your computer, right? Your Git repository sits inside of an invisible folder or a hidden folder inside of your files, right? It's the .git folder that you can't see. In Windows, if you have hidden system files and folders, you won't see it. You have to turn that functionality on if you go to Windows, right? On the Mac, it's also hidden because it starts with a dot, and you can view it by using ls.al to view all files, right? Right now, if you notice, there is no .git folder, right? But if I do an initialization command I need to initialize my Git folder. I'm going to do git init. Now, you don't have to remember this because I'm recording, right? So git init initializes your repository, right? If I press enter, right now, notice that my command prompt changed from this to this. This basically says, hey, I'm on the master branch, but I got some changes that I've got to finalize. Whenever I initialize my repository, now if I was to look at my folder structure, notice that it doesn't show anything. There's no .git. But if I do ls-al to show all, I see that I have a .git folder. That .git folder is the place that I'm going to store all my snapshots of all the versions of my project as we go forward. Locally, here. This isn't GitHub. This is just Git, okay? I did a git init. Now I'm going to do a git add dot. Git add dot basically says add everything to the staging area. All my files that I currently have, add them to the staging area. The staging area is a middle step before I commit them to the repository. Okay. We're going to go over this again. It's not the last time I'm going to show you. So if you're hearing it for the first time, or you're like, what is this jibber jabber he's talking about? Don't worry, right? I'm going to say it again, and we're going to talk about this over and over again, right? Git add dot. The next one is git commit -m for message initial commit. So what this does is says, hey, I want to add a message. I want to name my snapshot. My first snapshot is going to be called initial commit. The best practices for naming your first commit is first commit or initial commit. You can choose which one, right? Enter. Now what this does is it's created a snapshot of my 3 files that I have. I only have 3 files and a couple folders, right, that are being used. Okay, next. This concludes everything locally. I don't have to do anything. I've actually created a Git repository locally. We're good to go. But we're not connected anywhere remotely. The remote connection is on GitHub. GitHub is not Git. GitHub is a service, a cloud service, software as a service actually, right, where we can store our Git repositories and keep them in sync with one another, locally and remotely, okay? In order for me to do that, I need to go to GitHub and set up a repository first. So for us, for our course, we're going to go to github.com/Georgian College. This is where I store all of my archives, my code archives. You'll always have access to it. Okay? So Georgian College, and you're going to see there's not a file on here for you. I'm going to make one. In order for you to create a repository, and again, I recommend if you haven't signed up for GitHub, sign up, right? You should all have access to GitHub by now. If you've done it with, if you were there with Rich or Jarrett at all, right? Did Jarrett make you guys sign up for GitHub?
No, I'm doing it right now.
Yay, do it now. I'm going to create a new repository. And the way we create a new repository on GitHub is just a container where we're going to store all of our files, right? So I'm going to click this plus or this new. Either button is fine. And my new repository, make sure it goes in the right organization. I have a bunch of organizations. I'm going to go to Georgian. And I'm going to call this repository the same name as my lesson, which is COMP1006, Winter 2017, Lesson 1. And then press Enter. The great thing about GitHub is it gives you all the steps you need to initialize your repository locally, as well as how to set up the remote connection. These last 2 lines here, again, if you can't remember this, it's okay, right? Because again, we're going to do this a bunch of times, right? These last 2 lines are the remote connection. I'm going to take those last 2 lines, copy them, and paste them into my console. And when I press Enter, it might ask you to log into GitHub, right, if you've never done that before, because if you may not have credentials for your console. And you might like, I need to learn all this stuff to know PHP. No. But I'm giving you some technologies that you need to know as a developer. Doesn't matter whether you're doing PHP, C#, Java, C++, whatever it is, you need to know version control, right? If you need to learn it today, we'll learn it today. Now that I've done that, if I've done the push, I kind of executed these 2 lines of code. I added a remote called origin. Here's the link for the remote. That's what this thing is. And then I pushed for the first time with an unconditional push to the origin remote to the master branch. That's what this is doing. Branches in GitHub, think about branches in GitHub is, kind of a line of development, right? My main code base right now is the master code base, right? And whenever I if I add an additional feature in GitHub, right, I can create a separate branch for that feature. That does not affect my master branch. When I'm done doing working on the feature, I can merge it back into the master branch, and now my master branch includes that feature set, right? We're not going to be doing that in this course. All I care for you guys to do is put it up on GitHub. As you develop, update GitHub with another commit, another commit, another commit. And that way you keep track of your development, right? If I refresh now, and if you guys want to see my code, you can go up there and check it out yourself. It's github.com/Georgian College. And then if you go there, you'll see the first kind of repository that'll be listed is this one, the one we just made. So go check that out. All right. By the way, this is like the 3rd one I've done today. 3 different courses. Questions around this? If you've never seen this before, it kind of might seem confusing to you, but don't worry about it because I'm going to do it over and over again until you guys get really comfortable with it. So when you guys do things like more advanced stuff, right? When you do JavaScript or if you do advanced, web programming, right, with Rich, or if you do anything else, you'll have a basis on how to use GitHub and Git, right? You need to know how to do this. It's required for developers these days, okay? One of the questions they always ask you on an interview is, do you use some kind of revision control system? The answer is yes now, right? Okay, so now that we've got this link on GitHub, this is one of the requirements that you're going to have for every one of your assignments. All assignments are going to be required to have a Git link, right? You're going to give me that plus a zip archive of your files. Okay, those are the 2 things I'm going to ask you for each of your assignments. People who are taking multiple courses with me, you're going to be golden because you're going to see this twice, right? Yeah. Otherwise, if it's the first time you're doing it, don't be afraid of it. Don't be averse to command line, okay? It's not like the sun when you're a vampire. It's not like that, okay? It's truly really good. And as you get better with it, you'll realize how much more powerful it is than any kind of desktop tool that you can download, okay? Any questions around this so far? I know I've gone for a long while, huh? Lots? Okay, no problem. So now that we've done this, notice that in Visual Studio Code in this particular case, I can create commits here locally, as well as I can push remotely right within Visual Studio as long as I've done my commits properly, right? So let me show you that. If I make a small commit change or I make a change to my files, right? In this case, as an example, I want to add in Bootstrap, right? Because I want to look like a superhero with my CSS, right? Because remember, this is not a CSS course. Now, if that was difficult for you, what you just saw, here comes more challenges, okay? Remember, this is setup day, so please forgive me. I'm asking you for forgiveness right now. I know it's a pain in the ass, all right? But this is setup day. Once we've done setup day for the first and final time, we'll do less setup next week, all right? I didn't say no setup next week. I said less setup next week, all right? Okay? I'm gonna keep going now, all right? I want you to download and install Node.js on your machine, right? So if you haven't done that, you're already good. If you haven't done that, I want you to do it now. So Node.js, you're gonna say, why do I need Node.js if I'm using WAMP, right? We're gonna use Node.js not for the server portion of it. We're gonna use Node.js as a package manager to get packages to load up here for my project, okay? Now there's 2 versions, right? There's the 6.9.4 long-term stable version on the left, and there's the 7.4.0. Get the 7.4.0, right? By the way, next week it'll probably be 7.5.0. Remember I told you the web is the most difficult platform to develop for because it changes so bloody much. That's how it happens. Now, if you're a Mac user, for people who are Mac users, right? The problem with this is if you use this website, you'll have to do a sudo or a sudo, right? Whenever you do an npm command, right? To avoid this, if you're a Mac user, there's a bit of a complication for you guys, right? I know because I'm a Mac user. You need to install, or you should. You don't have to. You can just do it right from here. But if you want to make it even better for yourself, you can use Homebrew. You kind of install Node.js for the Mac, right? And if you do that, you can see one of the first links is right here. Install Node.js and npm using Homebrew on OS X and Mac OS. And the reason why you want to do this is because permissions on the Mac are a lot different than they are on Windows machines. And if Windows machines can just do the commands and there's no issues, Mac machines require super user, right, for you to do that, or different access. And to avoid that, if you use Homebrew, you don't have to put in the sudo command every single time. So there are the instructions right here. If you're a Mac user to do it properly, I recommend it, right? However, if you really don't want to do that, you don't want to, if that's not for you, it's okay to do it this way. You just have to do it. Every time I do a command, you're going to have to put a sudo in front, sudo, in front of your commands, right? Because otherwise, it's not going to work properly. All right, so you installed, let's suppose you installed Node. Node.js is a quick install for most people, right? I think you're still going, right? But if you installed Node, you should be able to do something like this. npm -v, Node -v. You should be able to do those things. You see what the version of the Node package manager is installed on your system, and Node.js. Now, here's the problem with Windows machines. I'm going to put it out there again. Windows machines have issues because you got to install Node and npm by modifying your environment variables sometimes. Okay? Who's ever done that? Who's ever modified your environment variables on Windows 10? Yes? Yes? You need to do that. I'm just telling you right away. That's one of the challenges you have with Windows. You're laughing, right?
A lot of stuff, dude.
Should I cut your head open and put more?
Yeah, keep going. I'm just downloading stuff.
Look, like I said, web, it's a mess, right? And you got to dive in here with me, man. If we're going to do the web together, we're going to, you got to love it. Right? Guys, I want to stop just for 5 minutes. Let's take a 5-minute breather. Yeah. Some people can go for a smoke or whatever they have to do, right? And then, or whatever. I don't smoke. Get a coffee, right? Do whatever you have to do. And when we come back, we'll continue, right? We'll continue until 5, and then we'll stop at 5, okay?